I'm James Thornock. Welcome to the Coder Kids podcast. Today we have another special guest on the podcast, and his name is James as well, but his last name is Peterson. And he is what I'd call tinker extraordinaire. Is that too much? A little bit.
I prefer jack of all trades.
Jack
Master of none.
that works too. We'll edit that in the video. So for a little bit of just checking my bias here, James is my best friend, which there's a little bit of nepotism there because you have my name, right? So again, disclaimer. But he is someone I really feel like embodies the tinkerer mindset and likes figuring out complex problems, likes really understanding things, and likes looking at data, and has an open mind and tries to figure things out, I think, generally speaking. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, I think, although who knows. So do you think that's a fair introduction? You were married, you have beautiful kids.
Yeah, my background is in biomedical engineering and with a focus on mechanics. I've also had a lot of experience being able to do electronics projects, some hobbyist electronic stuff, some stuff through work, and so kind of a really varied background there.
Fun stuff. Yeah. So I said you had beautiful kids, but I didn't say you had a beautiful wife. You do. So just to cover the bases, everybody's beautiful in the Peterson family.
I think so.
What's that?
I said I think so too.
That is good. That is good. On record, at least. So I want to take us back to your first introduction to technology. Is there anything that got you interested in technology to begin with? Was it always that way? Was there a particular device that you were interested or into? Can you walk me through that?
Yeah, well, so I don't think there's any one particular thing that got me interested in technology. I lived in Korea for a little while, and when we were there, I had to use a computer to send emails to my friends back in the States at the time. This was probably about 2000, so email itself was still pretty new. And I think that's some of the early computer use. I remember also a couple years before that. My parents had an old computer with a floppy drive, and they bought a whole box full of random games, and we would throw different floppies in there and play these terrible graphics are terrible, but they were fun in their own way games. And since then it's just been and I think there was a programming book for dummies that I picked up at one point, and it had an amazing line in it to me, and that is that especially with like programming is kind of a manifestation of the power of your mind. And I thought that was such a cool thing that
Incredible thing to tell dummies, at least.
Yeah.
Pretty bold.
I don't know if it's going to be good when it hits the table, but because if you go out and you build something with your hands, it's like, okay, well, that was the skill of my hands doing this thing. But when you program it, it's like that's the power of your mind directly coming straight from your mind to action, and that I think was pretty cool.
Yeah, wow, I'm just like enchanted. Like, please keep going. So, here you are. You've done a lot of these hobbyist projects. You've done some stuff for work. You're kind of technical. Do you think your personality influenced you picking a lot of this stuff up, or do you think it was the reverse, that these kinds of things informed your personality, or is it a little of both?
I mean, I was always the kind of kid that wanted to figure out how things work. I can't look at something and leave it alone. If I see a screw hole on something I'm playing with, I'm going to take a screwdriver to it. That thing is coming apart, figuring all the mechanisms inside, all the materials it's made of, or maybe, I know you want to talk about kind of tinkering more broadly. Like I'm just never, I'm the kind of person that looks at something and I can't be satisfied with it the way it is necessarily, or at least that I don't think we have to be satisfied with the things around us the way they are. We can always change them to make them suit what we want better. And so, you take it apart, figure out what makes it tick, you put it back together, and maybe you made something shorter so that it reaches a certain place better or faster or stronger. or maybe you add a little mounting thing to it so you can set it somewhere. Like there's always something you can do to make it fit your need better.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, that's that tinker, right? So tell us maybe about an early project that you did, something that got you interested. Tell us about an object that you took apart and what you learned about that.
Yeah. So I think the earliest, I wrote down a whole list of things, and I think the earliest one that I remember and I'm like kind of proud about, and it's kind of dumb, was a clock radio. Um, so this was first generation iPod mini days. So what was that, like 2003 or so?
I have no idea.
And yeah. 2003, 2004, we'll say. And I had an old clock radio that I had had for years, and it had a cassette deck on it. And that was good for a little while, but got my first iPod, and that really wasn't going to cut it, having a tape deck on that thing anymore. And I really wanted a speaker to play something through, and I didn't really have the money to go out and do that. And I think that's a large part of tinkering, is trying to figure out, is to use what you have around you, and figure out, thinking out of the box, find other ways to make them work. And so what I ended up doing was I said, hey, I've got this broken pair of headphones, and they have something that fits into my iPod. I've got this tape deck here, and I don't use this clock radio with a tape deck on it, and I don't use that cassette player anymore. I wonder if I can figure out a way to take out the cassette playing capability and make it play my iPod. And so there are screw holes on the back, so I proceeded to take the thing apart. I
Was
didn't
it
really
still plugged in at the time?
No, thank goodness.
My parent like instinct just like initiated right there. It was like, oh no, is this young kid? It's his first project. Like, that's good. Okay, you were smart enough to unplug it.
Definitely broken some things along the way. Definitely hurt myself a little bit a time or two, but that's all part of the process. So I took the thing apart. I didn't really have a lot of electronics experience at the time. In fact, no training at all, really. And I somehow, it's a miracle to me. I don't know how I did it. Figured out that if I cut these wires out of this place, and I don't remember if I even soldered at the time. I might have taped the leads together for the headphones that I'd cut off, and then I plugged it into my iPod, and sure enough, my iPod came out of the speaker on that 15-year-old clock radio, and it was so amazing to me that I did this thing by myself. I turned something that I had that wasn't I had this need, I had a want for this speaker, and I took something I had and I made it do something else.
Interesting. Oh gosh, that is pretty crazy. Now the quality of the speaker, it doesn't matter, right? But the eureka moment, that was pretty great. Now I have to like, so I have this image in my head. You like open up this thing and you put your iPod in there and you can close it because it's still got the cassette rocker.
I think that would have been V2. The iPod Mini, I think, is a little bit thicker than a cassette tape, but I could have probably taken out and unscrewed the motors. That was another funny part, because I didn't mess with the motorized part of it. So whenever I turned it on to the tape deck, it would start spinning the rotors to turn the reels.
Yeah, it was just the audio leads. You're saying,
yeah.
That is something else. Awesome. So, what would you say to a kid who is interested in technology, but maybe they're just really familiar with an iPad or touch interfaces, or they haven't really, maybe they have headphones, but maybe they're like expensive headphones. I've seen this trend where a lot of devices that used to be, lack of a better term, simple, right? Like headphones or speakers or whatever, have gotten a lot more complicated. Like, I've got this Echo Dot here with the Alex assistant, I'll call it. You don't want to say that last vowel. to trigger it, but there's a whole lot more in there than audio and electricity, right? Now you've got all kinds of microphones, you've got a lot of other stuff. Um, I've got all sorts of gadgets, but like these headphones have got Bluetooth in them, they've got several microphones in them, they've got several different audio drivers. So in some ways, you don't want to go ahead and break a $300 pair of headphones, or what are some good ways to get into this? What are some good projects, um,
Yeah,
maybe that aren't a 15-year-old clock radio? I guess that would work though too, right?
yeah. Well, and certainly as well, like you're saying, as all these things have gone from analog electronic signals to digital electronic signals and stuff, like it's really hard to start doing some of that tinkering work that I got introduced with. Um, so I think one of the things that I'd have to say um, is you're saying like it doesn't have to be that 15-year-old clock radio. Well, I'll tell you what, those are still around and people are getting rid of them. Um,
Hmm.
you don't have to work on these expensive things that are around you. I know that you wanted me to talk a little bit about building computers and everything, and we can move on to that at some point. But the first computer that I ever had was being thrown out of a university, and then my second computer that I ever had was being thrown away from work. The first computer that we got you set up with
Yeah.
was one that somebody had thrown out at a dumpster,
Yeah.
and so I'll tell you what, there is always someone who's getting rid of something that you can use. And I, you do have to be careful because you can become a bit of a hoarder. You're like, oh, I saw that thing and this person's throwing this thing out. And now I want to go pick that up and figure out what I can do with it. But yeah, you can judiciously, start finding some things, that maybe someone else doesn't want that you can figure out what you want to, do with it. So I think that's one point. And the other thing is, honestly, the maker space is just so amazing right now. Raspberry Pis alone are just so amazing and great for learning. And you don't have to even get the newest Raspberry Pi 4 with 8 GB of RAM and everything. That's kind of expensive. If you get the cheapest one, it's $35, and you can do a ton
Or
with it.
the
In fact,
zero, or the
yeah, you can
which
get
is
the zero for
$5.
$5.
Yeah. So
And so there are always some really inexpensive, very accessible options, and as well, like um, this is kind of more into the weeds. There are certain vendors that you can go to for electronic components, like DigiKey, that have a huge selection, that can be a little pricey. But if you go to eBay, I mean, you can get dirt cheap electronics, and if you're willing to wait some time, you can get something for $1, $2, $3 that'll really serve you well.
wow. Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about this, but an answer that came to my own mind when I asked the question, which is what happens. Sometimes in order to get answers, you have to ask questions. But it's like going to Goodwill and like buying something is broken. Like I'm going to
Yeah.
buy a broken toaster, and let's see if we can fix this bad boy. And you can feel pretty good about that, knowing that like you're not introducing any kind of electronic waste into the world. If anything, maybe you're reducing it, and if not, it's educational. And so you could buy a broken keyboard or toaster, or a keyboard that you don't know if it works or not, and these are things literally that people have given away, and you can get them for a couple bucks, something really, really inexpensive. So
Yeah, and I think an important part of that is really the concept that, like I said, I broke a number of things along the way. I kind of regret some of those and should have done it a little smarter. I know I've broken a cell phone or two, and uh, and so, but it's okay to break things. And in fact, I think it's really important that we teach. I'm thinking to my kids that it's really important to teach them it's desirable to make mistakes and sometimes to break things, because that's all part of the creative process. And so, it's important that we have room to break things. And I mean that in a lot of ways. I mean, first off, like you were saying, working on broken things, or things that are, falling apart is really nice because, well, you can't make them any worse. And
yeah.
the other, the other part of that too is you need to be able to have so there's that kind of emotional space to be able to do that. There's also um, the fact that like our kids and even ourselves, like we need to have time. We need to have like the actual time dedicated to doing that. We have so much structured time, and so uh, just being able to set aside some time to explore and figure things out is really important too.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely agree with that. Um, and we can talk about education later. So I'll actually leave it up to you. What do you want to talk about next? Do you want to talk about some more of your projects? Do you want to talk about computers? Do you want to talk about education and that creative space? There's so many options, James.
Yeah. Well, I think that one thing that we could talk about would be kind of the computer aspect of things. Um, because that's important certainly for enabling some of the tinkering, because honestly there's
Yeah.
so many good resources out there, but it's important that you have a device that you can access them on. I mean, like I said, the first computer I ever had was being thrown out at a university. My second was being thrown out at work. The computer that I have downstairs right now that I game on, I do, whatever on, is actually right now from 2013. I bought it for $300 off a guy on Craigslist, and that had parts and stuff that I didn't need on it. It had too much RAM or whatever, so I sold stuff. So in the end, that thing cost me about $125, and it is blazing fast to me. You don't have to have a lot of money to get a lot of these things going. And in fact, the used market in that regard can be pretty good as long as you're willing to go a little older. Or like I have a device right now that manages my network that was a used one of those tiny little computers that you'll see in corporate spaces from 2013, and it runs great. So you can really get into computers and all of this stuff for a pretty low bar.
Yeah, definitely. So I remember back before I was like really into building computers, I had some friends that had done it before, and we just had kind of an iMac at home that my wife used to do some graphic design work. And it was just our home computer, and I played some Steam games on it, and it became like kind of painfully clear that I couldn't play all of the cool games on the iMac, and I could play kind of low demand games on it, and it would do fine. For instance, like Portal was super smooth and it was really well optimized, which was a lot of fun to play on just a huge screen. It was like anyway, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But you introduced me, to your tinkering ways, and as an evangelizer a little bit, you saw this gaming tower. Gaming tower sounds interesting. I mean, it's just a computer tower next to literally the dumpster in our apartment complex. We lived in the same complex for a while, and you're like, hey, I picked this thing up. I was thinking of like going through it with you, and we could work on it together. And I was like, I don't have any experience. He's like, that doesn't matter. I just want you to be along for the ride, and maybe you could even have it. And I was like, well, that would be like insanely generous, but I'm interested. Like, let's figure this out. And so this is all based on memory. I don't have any of this written down. So like, this is the historical record of this. So if my posterity is listening to this podcast and I build some great computer, this is where it started. So you had a anti-static mat you laid down, and I remember using all kinds of tools. I didn't know. I remember I'd got the computer merit badge back in the day, and so I knew, roughly speaking, the component parts. I knew what RAM was and storage was, and I knew what a CPU was, but I didn't know how they connected or really worked together. I didn't really get what a motherboard even was at the time. I knew what a disk drive was, but it's like I had a low resolution image of what a computer really was. And you pulled back the curtain by literally pulling off the side panel, and kind of exploring on the inside. And I saw you just go to town. And for those of you listening out there, parents, maybe you can relate, but like, if you've ever seen your kids' eyes get really wide when it's like Christmas morning, or they're like doing some project they're like super interested in, that's exactly what happened to my friend James here. His eyes just popped open and he was just like in the zone. He was talking about all sorts of components. I didn't understand half of what you were saying, James, to be honest, at the time. And you were being so thoughtful, and I was just like watching, and I was like trying to learn as much as I could. And you'd go on about some part, and I wouldn't have any idea, and I'd nod, and but I did understand part of what you were talking about, and I think you let me work on a couple of the screws, and then you let me go home with that computer, and you donated a part, and we replaced some of the parts. I think I paid $30. I paid like $20 for like a keyboard, and like $10 for like a hard drive, like an old hard drive from out of the back of some weird warehouse that was full of random cables, and then the rest I spent on a mouse. So for like $30 out the door, like I had this like a 5-year-old gaming computer at the time, and I think this was like, when did we do this? Do you remember what time?
That would have been.
It was a GTX 570 was the graphics card that originally had. I remember that.
It was in 2016, I think. It would have been either or 2016 or 2015 or 2016.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's got to be 16 because I got married in 2015.
Yeah, well, you were gone that summer. You came back.
That's true.
And then somebody threw that out at Christmas time.
Oh my gosh! So you know what? Okay, so it was right on the edge. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, and so if anyone wants to look up when the GTX 570 came out, but that was not a new graphics card at the time.
No.
So that was my version of the story. Can you tell your version of the story? What was your angle?
Well, I mean, I knew that you had a need for a computer, and I saw this sitting around. I say need, like you were talking to me all the time about like how you were so excited to play these games and stuff like that, but it just wasn't working. And so I saw this thing, and once again, the tinkerer's mindset about like you see something and you try to figure out a use for it, and I'm like, I see this thing, and I'm like, James needs a computer, like we need to do this. So I pick it up, I bring it home, I open it up myself to look at it, and I think that this is workable. So, but I wanted you to get to learn from it. And honestly, that's what a lot of this is about too. Is whether it comes to tinkering or computers or whatever, either knowing someone personally or being able to go to a space where you can ask. Like I know, there's the build a PC subreddit or whatever. Like you can go somewhere or like
PC Master Race. Yeah, there's all sorts of.
You can go to. I mean, I put a post up on Stack Overflow at one point, an electronics overflow, to ask a question, and like I was kind of a little scared, but honestly, like when it comes to these spaces, everybody is just so eager and ready to help, and like like you bring them a question, and they're not going to think you're dumb, they're not going to talk down to you, like they're just gonna want to like help you gain all the knowledge that they have themselves. So that was kind of the position that I was in. I was like, I could put this computer, I could kind of fix this up myself and give it to you, but like I want you to come over and get the experience. And so when we did work on it, like you're kind of selling yourself short with just having a screwdriver and taking out a couple of screws. As I'm remembering it, like, and this kind of does also go back to the like figuring out how things work, like just popping it open and that moment, you probably never thought about what all the different parts in the computer were, and like there you are looking at its insides and getting to kind of explore that space. But so we disassembled. I think I did most of the disassembly as we cleaned every part over. and then
I'm starting to remember this. See, this is actually why I need your version of the story, because I literally don't remember all of it.
Yeah.
So
and then I had you put it back together yourself, because you got to
Yeah.
learn by doing. You can't learn. I mean, it is good to read things, to listen to things, to watch things. Like those are all important parts of the story. But like until you put it together yourself, it doesn't set in your head, in your brain.
And there's this feeling of ownership too, right? Yeah. That was different from owning a Mac. You know, I owned a MacBook for a while, and that's a whole nother story. Remember that story?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I apologize that we're both named James, and we still have never come up with nicknames for each other. We can't figure it out.
Well, it's really not a problem for either one of us, because we don't have to call ourselves by our names. I never call myself James, you know? So
only occasionally we'll refer to ourselves in the third person, right? Yeah. So, yeah, it's so for those of you listening, well, you see, you can't even tell the bald one, you know, from the one with, you know, thick black hair. I don't know. So good luck. That's what I'm trying to say. I hear your struggle. I'm not sure how to fix it. And our last initial, you know, mine is T for Thornock and P for Peterson. Yeah. Even those they sound similar. So I'm not sure
if you say it too fast or aren't listening close, it's the same.
It's basically the same. So anyway, where were you? So you had me assemble it. I actually do remember like snapping the RAM back into place, which is, by the way, an incredibly satisfying feeling, and putting it back together, having this ownership. Like I said, I had this MacBook before. I paid $3,200 for it, I think, which is just a lot of money. Like still, actually. I'm not sure my computer costs that now. I mean, maybe like the entire thing, maybe, but I'm not sure. I'm not actually sure.
No.
Yeah. So, and that's with like a 3070 in it. So, which we got to talk about that too.
I think, there is part of that story that I do want to talk about.
I mean, it is very technical, and it's very much related. So
the card itself isn't the thing I want to talk about. It's how you got it.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, this feeling of ownership of like, like I made this thing, I built it. You know, it's kind of like building a chair, learning woodwork. It's like I did that. It's
pride.
Yeah,
sense of pride that comes with it. The satisfaction.
It's a little bit different than woodworking in that, like, woodworking, like, you built the entire thing. Computers, that's like you're assembling parts that were made by like a company, and then the company used the intellectual property of like hundreds of employees or thousands of employees in a decade of research, and like, so it's like, yeah, you made it, sure, bub, but like you just kind of put this stuff together. So, but there's like still that feeling of Legos, ownership. You know? Yeah.
And in a similar way, like, yeah, you're assembling the Legos, but you didn't injection mold those bricks, you know, sure. But I think I think you can still be proud of the creativity and the knowledge that went to making whatever you made.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, there's that story. After that, you know, obviously I wanted a stronger graphics card, which would allow me to play newer games or at higher frame rates or the refresh rates, whatever you want to call it. And that bug's kind of just been in me ever since. And unlike with a device that you purchase and it is what it is, you can upgrade the components. Like you could a car, you could give it nicer tires or a transmission or an engine or whatever. And yeah, I've just been on that road, and now I think I've upgraded basically as much as I want to upgrade within a reasonable framework. All of my wants are now like unreasonable. Like,
right.
You know, a VR headset, you know, the Steam Index or whatever, and maybe like a 2 more or 3 more 144 hertz monitors, right? Like it's starting to get into the ludicrous zone. But you kind of get that bug where you want to replace something, you want to modify it, you want to change it, and because you can see results, like the fruits of your labor are like evident. Like when you get something to work, like you can verify it, and I think that is attractive. So yeah, let's talk about that 3070, and let's talk about Python a little bit.
So I am a self-taught programmer. I use Python mostly, and everything that I've done with it has just been kind of needs based. I think that like yeah, I said I had a programming for dummies book and that was I think a C programming book. Um, and like those are important. They can be to learn just some of the basics, but like at the same time, like I said, everything that I think the best way to learn something is through a project. So like you have something you want to do, and so you just kind of keep Googling stuff until you put all the pieces together and figure
Yeah.
out how that goes. Um, so yeah, uh, and James got his card because of a Python program that I wrote. I know that right now there's a huge shortage of graphics cards and everything like that, and prices are
The prices
crazy.
have gone up. I
Yeah,
just checked it, James, like yesterday,
yeah,
and now they're selling for double MSRP.
yep. And
Like
like
the
you,
prices, I thought they would like kind of
uh-huh.
slowly, pitter patter down like almost everything else in the marketplace does, but not so.
Supply just hasn't gotten better yet. Um, yeah, and so the real issue is that like sites like Newegg that are selling them at MSRP just have a limited stock, and so you have to really be quick to get them. And so I don't remember if I think I proposed a solution for you when you were talking about
Yeah.
you wanting to get one, and I was like, hey, I think I could program something for you, and so I ended up programming this thing that would check Newegg's webpage every minute, and it would download the web page that like has all of the cards sorted, and it would go through like scrub through it, and it would, if anything was in stock within a certain price range, it would send an email and a text message to James so he could like hop on real quick and get it.
Yeah.
It took a while for it to work because a minute even is not enough time. Like that's too much time right now with the current
Well, so
environment.
that was the funny thing. Like you originally set it to 10 minutes and then 5 minutes
Yeah,
and
something
then
like
2 minutes and then 1 minute. I convinced you. I was like, come on. And he's
Yeah.
like, it's a lot of resources. And, and, and you're right. And well, so I would like to interject and say there was a little bit of a difference between what James Peterson did and what other people did with bots. A lot of people wrote scripts, often called bots, which I don't know if it's completely accurate. I don't know. And they were set to actually purchase the card,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So like they were programmed to purchase as many cards as possible. His
Right.
was just at a clear competitive disadvantage because it would just
Yeah.
let a human being, me in this case, know, hey, is this thing in stock? And then I would have to just feverishly tap to whatever. And I did this at least 25 times
Yeah.
before
It sent
I
you
was successful.
yeah, it sent you a web link too with the text message and the email, so you could just tap it and it would do that all for you. And I mean, I think it was really cool that like there was this need. I'm going to call it a need for you to have this graphics card. And
Need being a
yeah,
relative
yeah,
term we can
yeah.
redefine later. Yeah.
And I was able to program a solution for it, and like it's really cool to see something that like this was a serious, I don't want to call it a serious problem, but like this is a real challenge of getting a graphics card, and like I was able to knock out a program that actually solved it. The card that's in your machine right now is that card. And the thing about that too that was really
Yeah.
fun for me, like I'm saying, program based or project based learning is super important because I had I kind of cobbled some parts of the original program together from other things I had done, and then like it was like, oh well, turns out that getting the raw HTML file from the website's not going to cut it because you there's all the background JavaScript and stuff that goes on that post renders after you download a web page. Like I had to figure out how to handle that, and then
Thanks,
I
Newegg.
yeah, and then
Newegg is not sponsoring this podcast, by the way,
no.
but might as well.
So the other and then like I was realizing like, dang, I had it tracking how much data it was downloading, and I realized like, dang, this is downloading I think like a gig a day just in a web page, just in a text web page. And so I was like, I need to
Every
figure out,
minute,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, and so I was like, I need to figure out how to not kill my SSD just through like downloading the same page over and over and over and over again. And so like I had to figure out how to write the page to the RAM instead of to the disk. And then it was like, okay, well that's working fine. Okay, well how do I interact with this way with a database that I have in the background, so that way it's not sending you out a text message like every minute for the same card, even though you don't want it, or like anyway, just all these little things. It's like I kind of had some idea of what I wanted to do, and I got to learn so much just by knocking it out. And in fact, that's one of the funny things about this too. Like I have a huge problem sometimes of letting the perfect become the enemy of the good,
Okay.
I had a coworker who really wanted to do like a particular project that was supposed to be a proof of concept as like a final good that he would take to market. And it's like, you're never gonna get to a point where you're like, this project is good and like accomplishes its purpose if you are always trying to get that perfect thing. But I'll tell you what, there's kind of a secret. Like there's so many different ways that you can accomplish the same task, and if it works, that's the right way.
Yeah. Yeah.
um and so yeah,
If the
my
chair has
original
5 legs or 3 legs or 4, if you can sit on it and it doesn't
yeah
fall apart, like we're gonna let it go. Yeah.
yeah, so my original program, like, am I it was it the best one? No, but I threw something down and it started working, and then I refined it, I improved it over time, I learned, and I grew. But honestly, like, while it wasn't the best thing ever, I'm still proud of it. I think I did a good job, and I can be happy with what I did. And so yeah, it worked. I was really really happy with how that went.
Well, and I'm super grateful, right? So I'm shouting my gratitude to the world, and I was able to buy it, and then you got something out of the deal, a little something, and
And
I sent
I'm very
my
grateful. Yeah. Go ahead.
1070 Ti on over. I was like, thank you, but it wasn't like a direct. It's just
No.
we're friends, and he's always kind of taking care of me and taking me under his wing. So
It's kind of funny as James has gotten into it, and I gave I kind of started him down that path. He well surpassed anything that I have or did with my computer, and so I think he probably felt a little bad for me at that point.
yeah, because like my computer was nicer, like objectively, and
Yeah.
yeah, and part of the justification from that is like I'm like exporting videos all the time. There are things that I want to do with Minecraft. One of the guests we had on the podcast, I think it was like episode 8 or something. It was a long
Oh
time
yeah.
ago.
Well,
Ultimate
the
immersion.
the other thing too was around the time we started that project. You were, I think, trying to do an Overwatch video, and it was just not cutting it on being able to record and play at the same time for
Yeah.
your kid friendly game reviews. And so like that had a real impact there too.
Yeah, that's funny. I actually forgot about that. Well, see,
Mhm.
and this is why you keep good friends around that have better memories than you do, right? So I'm gonna need to go to the walking archive over here, and I don't mean that obviously in a derogatory way, but well
We
that
all rely on each other in ways.
yeah, well, and we have to. In the podcast I just recorded just prior to this one, with a guy named Alexander from Streamline Media, he talked about like the soft skills needed, and like you can't build anything like really complex without working with other people.
Yeah.
And the soft skills are super important, especially as AI becomes more prevalent and starts taking over white collar jobs and blue collar jobs. And it's like, well, what's left? Like, it's the human stuff, right?
Yeah,
So,
fair enough.
um, well, okay. What I do want to shout out one of the projects that you did, which was a garage door opener. Was that an Arduino? Or was that a Raspberry Pi?
Oh gosh, I didn't even have that on my list of projects. That one was just like
See, look at this guy. He's forgetting his own projects.
a hilarious like side thing. Like, I was saying that
It's the one I remember.
I can't let anything sit. I have a couple things. I even have some examples to show you, like some
Oh, please
physical
do.
things to
If
but yeah, but the one that you're talking about real quick, like I can't look at something and like be satisfied with it the way it is necessarily, or rather, like I like to think, well, this thing is is really good. I just wish it were a little X, or like, wouldn't it be cool if it could, do this too, or like be a little different, or what would happen if X? And so like what I did was there the we're in this house, and the garage door was there, and like I don't know why I did this. I think like smart garage doors were starting to come out at the time, and I was like, oh, that's a really cool concept. I wonder if I could throw something together. Um, so I had a cheap Raspberry Pi Zero W. Those things are $10, and they do so much. And if you get them on sale, you get it for like $5. It's insane what they do. But anyway, so this guy, or so I had two key fobs, for two garage door openers, and I only ever used one. And so I took one of them apart, looked at it, and I was like, you know what? I bet I could rig up the Arduino, or the Raspberry Pi, to basically press the button on the garage door, the garage door opener. And so that's what it did. It bridged two of the contacts to simulate a button press whenever so I didn't bridge the contacts. Technically, I tied the Arduino, the Raspberry Pi, to ground with it, so it had common ground, and I pulled one of the pins high. It simulated a button press. And so anyway, yeah, and then I had a little reed switch, which is a little magnetic switch, and I put that next to the garage door, and I put a little magnet on the garage door, and so I could log in to I could log into the Raspberry Pi remotely, and I could tell it, hey, garage door open, garage door close, and then it would tell me when the garage door was closed when the magnet hit that magnetic switch, and it was really just a fun little dumb thing to do, but it worked, and it was I learned, and um, yeah, that was a really funny one.
I don't know. I remembered it because it was just so inventive. Like I hadn't even heard of like a smart garage door. Um, and I recently broke both of our garage doors, like a complete Nimrod, and so I've got to fix something. But then it might be fun to do, and you'll notice a trend in this, like, um, James isn't saving anyone's life by hooking an iPod up to a clock radio, or getting your garage door to open from your phone, from anywhere. But there are some useful applications, and it really fosters a really good problem-solving mindset. So, what are some work projects that you've done that maybe have had some utility there, in a different way, you think?
Well, so I think the first thing that comes to mind, not necessarily a specific project, is it kind of takes me to the concept of analysis and synthesis. I've heard some people using that phrasing recently, and I really like it. And the idea is, the analysis part is you break something down into its pieces to understand what it is and how it works. And the synthesis part is you take those pieces, you find the ones you like, to find the ones that work, and you put them together, maybe with some other things to make them work better, to make them, improve something, or whatever. And so, when it comes to the engineering process, like that's huge. That being able to break something down and synthesize it into something new helps to make you a better engineer. Um, and so like you can do that with things. You can also do that with a problem. I know, in biomedical engineering, which is my field, in R&D, there's a stage gate process that the FDA wants to see for um, making new med devices, and you have to generate needs and design puts. You have a nebulous design process. You generate your outputs, and you verify that what you made meets the user needs. And that first step, that user need step, is actually one of the most critical steps, because like understanding what a person really needs, what your customer needs, what the the user of your project needs, is really important. And so coming up with with a great problem statement and the great need statements, like that's really important. And so like you can use the analysis part to kind of break down I didn't realize that's what it was. Like you have to break down what it is that they are really needing. And this is true for like when you're working on like a programming project, and you have to figure out what the client, like what their needs really are. Well, like, so you wanted a project that that would get you a graphics card,
That's right.
and it's like,
I didn't know I
so,
wanted this project,
and
but yeah.
and so it's like, okay, well, your need is the graphics card. Well, what are you got to be able to break that down and analyze it and say, well, okay, well, you have a price range you're willing to pay. You don't want to pay scalper prices.
Right.
Maybe it's like, I want to buy it from a reputable vendor. I want to do this particular card. And anyway, but the idea is like you need to be able to analyze something and break it apart into
The
its pieces really
parameters.
well. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so being able to analyze and synthesize like really feeds into the out of the box thinking that makes you a better engineer. I think specific projects. I don't know that I have as much of an example there though. I do know, and this is really funny actually. So when I started my first job, it was for a podiatric orthopedics company down in Houston, and when I was doing my interview, I told my boss that I like to do some hobbyist electronic stuff, and so within the first couple months there, he approached me and he's like, "Hey James, I know you said you like doing hobbyist electronic stuff. I'm trying to figure out a way to track what my machines are doing in the machine shop. Kind of, are they running? Are they stopped? How, like, kind of figuring out how well he's utilizing his resources." And he's like, "Do you think there's anything you could do with that?" And I didn't particularly know exactly how I'd execute it. But like, yeah, I think I could throw something together. And so I kind of broke down the problem into tracking each machine, and like I was saying before, the way that the solution that works is the right solution. Sometimes there are really expensive ways that you can do this, buying all sorts of equipment and softwares and stuff that you can do this with. But I thought, you know what? There is a light stack on these things that tracks out the status of the machine. This little light stack shows green if it's running, red if it's stopped, and like maybe yellow or flashing if it's an alarm. And so I was able to tie something in that just looked at LEDs and said, are these lights on or are they off?
Was it a camera or was it like a light sensor or?
No. So each machine in the end setup, each machine has a Raspberry Pi that sits on it. I had to wire in. I actually made a custom circuit board, and that would and I would wire things into that would then get read by the Raspberry Pi, and that information would get displayed on a little LCD that I put on the Raspberry Pi to say what it was, what its state was, and track some basic metrics there. And then it sent that data off to another Raspberry Pi that would aggregate all that and would generate weekly reports and things like that. So like he could literally go to a URL or an IP address. Really, you go to an IP address, and it would have active like all 16 machines in his machine shop, exactly what all of them were doing, and he could break down metrics for the day and everything like that. And that was really a really
like
fun
runtime and that kind of thing. Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what would be the cost of some software that would do that?
Oh, like, so those softwares are hundreds of dollars a machine per time period. And so
so like subscription model kind of.
so like they'll per like X number of dollars per machine per year, and so those can get pretty pricey. And the other fun thing too is like, they would ask me, hey, like, can you get it to do this? And I would say, yeah, sure. And I'd bang something out in a day, and they get brand new functionality you can't really get if you pay somebody else to do it. There's plenty of merit to that though as well. Like there are reasons to do that, but yeah, it was nice for me to get to do that, and it was really highly customized for them in that way too.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I mean, it definitely helped that you were on site, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that, you're available and interested in such a project. So, yeah, and that's really interesting, and I think that's true of the market. When parents are wondering, hey, is this going to be useful for my kid, and how is this going to be useful? And I can't give you a direct answer because like it's just hard to give direct answers for these things because there are so many applications, right? Like if your kid plays tennis, then like maybe they'll have better hand-eye coordination, and maybe that means they'll drive better to work or something. But like I don't know. I'm just like pulling that out of thin air. But something I could say for coding is like there are a million opportunities in different applications. This creative mindset of trying to problem solve out of the box. It's like, well, it all started with James Peterson working with a clock radio and an iPod, and then he was able to program Raspberry Pi, small computers attached on a network to industrial machines and read out
Yeah.
data, which is really valuable, and hopefully save some money, and maybe brought down the cost of orthopedic devices. What do you call those?
Yeah, yeah. Podiatric orthopedics, so specifically foot and ankle,
Yeah.
things that interact with the bone.
So we're talking about reducing medical costs, people. So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
ultimately, so I don't think anyone in the United States of America is like, yeah, I can't wait to spend more money on medical care at this point as part of GDP. And so these are things that can have real impacts, in an economy, whether it's local or larger. But it does start out with kind of breaking stuff and like little projects and fun projects, and I think it's hard to divorce the two, right?
Yeah.
But you're not going to get that article like on Forbes or on some article that's like zooming in on like the billionaire. It's not going to talk about their awkward teenage years when like they said a bunch of weird stuff and they were constantly breaking stuff and they didn't know how to talk to people, right? They're billionaires now, so it kind of doesn't matter. But
Yeah,
but
and there's also a little funny thing with that to me sometimes about the concept of like survivorship bias kind of thing. That
oh
like
yeah,
these are, I mean, those people are super exceptional, and we should, where we can, take lessons from some of these people that we admire and that we want to be successful. Like, but at the same time, like some of these people are just unique, and their stories might not be the same as your stories, and so yeah, you got to
yeah.
find the path that works for you. And I'll tell you what, that is a really interesting thing with today's environment. Just that like jobs that weren't jobs in the past, even 5 years ago, are like huge now, and so you really don't know what the future is going to look like. So it's really hard to tell what hard skills are going to be important in the future. And so yeah, you gotta. I think it's really important to learn sometimes mindsets and ways of thinking, and over some of the specific skills themselves.
So about those mindsets, let's jump into education here a little bit. Obviously, we're all about coding. We're all about education. We personally have talked probably for hours about school and different ways that could be set up. What are some ways that you think we could foster some of this creativity? Like, let's say, you took dynamite to the school system, you could create a new one. What would that look like? And what are some activities that students might participate in?
So I've had some conversations with some people about kind of things kind of like this recently. Just the idea that like I don't think many of us will argue that our education system does a great job of preparing us to get into the real world and to get a job, and to figure out what you like doing. Right now I'm trying to figure out, if I really like what I've been doing for a while, and maybe I want to make a change in another direction. Because like as an engineer, I went to college, and it was, I think for a lot of engineers, college is a lot of job training, but like for a lot of other people, it might not be the case. I know your degree doesn't really have anything to do with what you're doing right now.
Right. I mean, it has to do with the educational aspect of it, but the truth is I did that stuff after college, right? The
Yeah.
actual teacher training happened outside of college. And I
Yeah.
specific, yeah. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I got a history degree and a minor in philosophy. So I'm really good at tracking ideas and appreciating history. But yeah, in some ways, like I feel like it was like grown up story hour, right? Like you had to write essays, you
Sure.
had to be academic about it. But I mean, it's basically story hour, and I think that's valuable. But I'm not sure it prepared me to be an entrepreneur or to do any of that. Um, However, I will defend my education in terms of I did get to be on the editorial staff of the Houston History magazine, and this is not like a for-profit magazine, right? This is a the editor in chief is Debbie Harwell, excellent lady, just incredibly precise and caring, and I learned so much by being a part of that environment because it was like a working environment um, that was real, and so I did get that opportunity while in college, and I think that translated. But you're right. I mean, I think a lot of people would say that their degrees don't exactly match
Well,
what happens later.
and even with one like mine, uh, it didn't do a good job of preparing me for what the day to day looks like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So like I learn various math, and I learn certain things about the regulatory environment. I do, you know, some electronics and programming learning. I do all these different forms of learning, but like, wh- what do I do when I sit down at my desk? It's not necessarily those same things. And in defense of the education system as it stands, I mean, trying to serve everyone, it's
Hmm.
not going to serve anyone particularly well. And I do think that we do need to have some base educations and things we all share. And I think it does an okay job of that. So really, I think that uh, school itself, kind of like you're just saying, or not actual school, but the best service you can get towards your job or figuring out what you like, whatever, like those are best done outside of the classroom altogether. Whether
Okay.
that's yeah, whether through a program or getting to do something with the newspaper like you did, like that's great. I spent some time working in a lab at one point. Um,
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah. I worked in an undergraduate research lab, and I did a summer program there. I did an internship as well and things like that. Those are excellent ways to do it. Getting to tinker around, honestly, like that's a fantastic way. I was talking with someone recently about programming and how kind of the model that a lot of us have in our heads is, hey, you graduate high school, you go to college, you get a degree, and you go out into the field. I have a friend who's working for, I think he was working for Facebook most recently, and I think he's working for Target again now, or not again. I think he's working for Target or some other large corporation like that as a programmer, and he doesn't have a degree at all, and all of his stuff comes from kind of a portfolio of work that he's built,
Hmm.
just like an artist would, like your work speaks for itself, and so like this is really interesting actually. Uh, I um, I have a computer downstairs that I put together, and it's I call it my server. It runs Linux, and I do all sorts of things on it. And a conventional rack mount server might have equipment on it called an IPMI, which lets you remotely manage it. So you can boot it up, you can shut it down, you can pull up a screen, just like you were sitting at a desk in front of it. And I wanted something that let me do that while it was sitting somewhere else, because I had some times where like it froze up on me and I had to like physically go over and turn it off and turn it on, which works when I'm home, but if I'm gone, I can't do that. Um, and so I had to teach myself how to make circuit boards. I knew a little bit of electronic design stuff, and I looked at some stuff online. And there's a program called Eagle CAD, and I think this might have been one of the first things that I did on Eagle CAD. Um, and it matches some of the contour of the Raspberry Pi, and it's
For
got some
those of you just listening, let me interrupt real quick. For those of you
Yeah.
just listening to the podcast, he's holding up a circuit board that looks like a baseball diamond shape, basically. That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, that's
like a fan, kind of. And he's holding it up to the camera. So,
and
anyway.
I put a Raspberry Pi symbol on the back for fun.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, so I took that guy and I put it on a Raspberry Pi. This is an older version of it, and actually with the idea that you know, being able to make mistakes and everything. Rev 1 of the board, I miswired something, and so I had to like take a knife to the circuit board that I had printed up and cut it and solder something in somewhere else. It's funny. It's kind of a bodge, but the idea is like, I taught myself how to do this, and then when I was doing that job I was describing at work, like I had taught myself the skills on how to design circuit boards. I had a couple of boards made for that project, several boards, and like I had done some of these things. So anyway, I in interviews have been able to talk about some of these things that I've done, like being able to do this remote management with a circuit board that I designed and stuff like that. And like at my last job, I was doing electronics prototyping and stuff, and like that's not something that I did in my degree. It's something
Right.
that I figured out how to do in my own time, just because I was tinkering. I had some project that I wanted to do, and like honestly, just spending that time out of the classroom is so critical and important to developing the skills that you can use later.
And I do find it a little bit, not ironic, maybe just funny, kind of almost whimsical, that something that you enjoy doing, right? Like you just, guys, if you just look at James's face when he's into a project, and he's just so laser he's like laser beams are coming out of his eyes, like going onto the circuit board, and his whole like soul is in whatever chip he's working on, and he's just so psyched by it. And even when I've been next to him, sometimes he forgets you exist. It's beautiful. It's like this incredible thing. And like, but that is the thing that's like a company wants to see. So, you know, I at some level, and maybe not all companies, certainly, and maybe not all applications, but if I do think we're firmly, and I'm just gonna go out on a huge, well, it's a thin limb, but I'm gonna go fully out on the limb, which is I don't think school's enough anymore. Like if you just go to school and let's say you get A's, you know, that used to mean a lot. It still means a lot for if a company is trying to look for someone who's like really good at following rules. I mean, that's actually a fairly good indicator. But if they're looking for someone who's like creatively trying to solve problems and they don't care so much about how they do it, like what they do in their free time almost matters more, which is it's almost depressing because like that's not where they spend most of their time, right? That's just where they spend a tiny little bit of their time. So
Right.
anyway, so if your kid seems to be spending too long like making a clock or on some kind of weird electronics project, you know, maybe try not to be too harsh on him, and or her, certainly, and let them tinker a little bit longer and obsess over it, especially if they're a kid. You know, time's on their side at that age, and if they can kind of take pictures and document it, that even helps too, because you might be able to use that later on. I'm sure I've done little projects, whether for merit badges or whatever else, that I wish I had like some kind of documentation of. Most of my childhood is just lost in time, like most people's. But anyway, bit of a tangent there, but it all came from the idea that like it just hit me that some of those things that you did that were valuable to companies even were also valuable to yourself, and you learned them because you wanted to learn them in a project-based way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's so fascinating. Wow.
Well, and it's also interesting because like the model, like you're saying that you can go to school and get good grades and it demonstrates certain things, and like I think that there's
It
kind of
does.
mentality of like uh, you go to school, you do well, you go get a job, and they treat you well, and you do well there, and then you know retire, like this weird. But honestly, one of the things that I thought a lot about lately too is like you have to be able to figure out what makes you happy doing, and so like you have to be able to have the time and the space to be able to try different things and maybe shadow somebody or just learn. Like I wish that I had um, access to some of these things when I was younger, so that I could have like figured out, and I probably would have done different things, and that's okay. Um,
We're
but
not
yeah, I
dead
mean,
yet. That's good, you know.
no, no, and it's okay if you figure out that you want to do something else later. Like you don't have to do the same thing forever. And yeah, so I mean, you got to just be able to tinker and explore and try and see what you like, see what makes you happy.
Well, and here's the thing. I've talked to people who are fresh into retirement, and some take it really well, and some retirement wrecks their life. You know,
Hmm.
so it's like if you don't have a solid set of hobbies that you can, even occupy yourself, I mean, you also have to take care of yourself. Like, are
Yeah.
you going to be happy with hobbies and with your family, or is that going to be kind of just a nightmare? And is it literally better for the world if you're on the golf course? Like, and that's assuming that you like golf, which who knows? I don't like golf. Maybe that's because I haven't done it really. But yeah, I don't think the traditional track is even an option for most fields at this point. Certainly not for computer science. Um, and it's interesting to see how it plays out. How much do soft skills play a role? What is team learning like? What are the problems that need to be worked on? And I think this is where it's really hard for anyone to make predictions about education, which is part of the reason it's fun to talk about. Let's be honest, because like no one knows, right? We're just
Yep.
shooting in the dark here, and that's that. Like we don't know what tomorrow will bring. We don't know what problems there will be, and live in pre-industrial revolution, or maybe even during the industrial revolution when there was like a factory and that was the newest technology that there was. Like you did your profession, you were a smith and your son was going to be a smith. Like that's just like what happened, right?
Right.
Um, most people, I forget what the percentage was before the industrial revolution, like what percentage of the population were farmers. It was most people, like
Hmm.
almost everyone is a farmer, right? And if you would have gone back in time and you would have looked them in the eye and you say, you know what, like 2% of the population are farmers these days, in the future,
Right.
and you're going to lose all these jobs. And they would have been like, no, not my family farm. And it still tugs at my heartstrings to hear that someone has to sell a family farm, because like that happens.
Sure.
But for 98% of the population, like it's basically happened already. And there are other jobs out there. And so it's different because you used to pass down all these traditions, these sets of values, even practices like, this is how you plant crops in a specific way, and this is how we've always done it, and whatever. And now it's like, good luck, kid. I'm going to teach you how to work with other people, and you're going to figure it out, hopefully. And break apart some electronics in the
Yep.
meantime.
Yep.
But yeah,
Well,
good.
and that's kind of a funny thing as I was thinking about that is like one of the big problems or one of the biggest challenges in the market is like to figure out what unmet needs there are, right? Because yeah, you can. There are what we call like Me Too products where you see someone making something and you're like, well, I think I could make that too, and so you enter that same space. Like there's value in that, but
For
like
for
the real
competition and pricing, yeah, but
yeah. But the real big challenges are the ones that are the needs that are going unmet. And so I think that's a fun thing with tinkering sometimes too, is being able to say like, hey, there's this thing that I want to do, and if I want to do that, I bet you somebody else needs that thing done too. I bet someone else has that need that needs to be met too. And so, like, granted, I think I'm probably gonna put that computer powering on and off design up in an open source fashion.
Mm-hmm.
I've been meaning to do that for a while. So yeah, I can post that, and like that could get used that way. But honestly, that's something that if I could tweak a little bit here or there, like maybe I could commercialize that. Or I have this is another fun project. Um, I have a computer that I took a laptop that was breaking apart and I put it on a piece of plywood, and it now lives behind the TV and it works great as a computer. But it was completely unusable before I did that. I'm all about salvaging stuff. Well, anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so it's sitting behind the TV now, and well, that's a really inconvenient place to try to push a power button. So I hooked one of these Raspberry Pis up to it that I with one of these boards that I made, and I was like, okay, well, I can trigger that from my phone now. But I was like, well, that's just too much. I can't go to a URL on my phone.
The
It's like,
work.
I bet
Think about the calories you're burning.
I bet I
Come on.
I bet I could rig up. I know. First world problems here. So I figured, you know what? I bet I could hook something up so I can touch something like a button on the back of my nightstand, and it'll send a signal to the TV to the computer to turn it on. And so like now I have a setup where it's actually a capacitive base, so it's just a screw. There's a screw on the back of my nightstand that I can touch, and I hold it for like a couple seconds to make sure there's no misreads. But I touch that, and it turns on the laptop behind my TV. Like, while that's lazy and kind of fanciful, like I bet you that there's some money that could be made in like being able to remotely power on devices like that. Like
Yeah.
anyway, like there's always a need to be met, and if I'm having that same concern, like somebody else wants to solve that to have that problem solved too.
Yeah. Yeah. Just remote. Yeah. Just power buttons, but that you could put anywhere. I'm sure that you could probably sell that.
Yeah.
So you start a company, Rush Valley Technology, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. That was another conversation we had like years ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, absolutely great to have you on the podcast today. We've definitely gone on for a while now. This may be our longest episode yet. It's been great. When it comes to a kid who's interested in technology, is there anything else, like if you could speak directly to them or directly to their parents, is there anything else that you'd like to say?
Yeah, I think, really, and this has been a hard one of the struggles I've had for a lot of my life is like being afraid of failure, and it's like it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail and to try, and in fact, like that's how you learn the most. So just get out there. If you want to know how something works, like go talk to somebody, because I'll tell you what, like everyone out there who is passionate about what they do wants to share it with someone else. And so like, you need to find the resources that'll help you out, and and you might fail the first time. You might not make it the best way the first time, but if it works, that's the right way to do it. So get out there, explore, find something that you're passionate about, and and have fun. Have fun.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And until next time, thank you for listening. Feel free to rate, comment, subscribe on the YouTube video and to the feed. And if you have any recommendations for guests that we should have or topics, I'd love to hear those. James@coderkids.com. Until the next one.